Hey. Good morning to all. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And we are going to acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Ojibwe, Cree, Dakota people, the national homeland of the Red River Métis, and our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Ron Merritt. I'll be your chairperson this morning. Introducing everybody via Zoom, Mr. Stu McPherson, and to my left is Bill Maretsky. Our recording secretary is Jeswiner Kumar, and representing the city from the assessment department is Mr. Merrick Frolick. We will not be talking about the Zoom because the applicant, we have one applicant in here, and they are present. This morning we'll be hearing an application for revision in accordance with the Municipal Steps Act. The matters for which revision is requested that have been described in each application, and we'll limit discussions to those matters. The statements that the applicant or the assessor make at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anybody speaking these matters must be sworn in. Please be advised that assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by City Council and is independent of it, along with the city administration. We make our decisions based on the evidence provided at the hearing and issue a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decision in respect to application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to application for an exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included in the board's order. In respect to the hearing this morning, I will confirm the matters to be addressed, which either the applicants following the swearing in will then have the assessor's testimony, followed by questions that the other applicant may have, and then will be the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have the opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all evidence about the application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket this morning. The session will close after the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the order registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live stream recorded and will be part of the public record. We'll ask our secretary to swear in the assessor and to swear in our only applicant, Mr. Newman.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Merrick Frolick.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
That is true.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, please stand up.
Mark Newman.
Thank you. Do you affirm that the evidence you are about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you, sir.
All right, the first property that we have is 1835 Sargent Avenue. So, Mr. Frolick, I think we'll just go according to the docket. So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Just as an overview, I want to tell the panel members that Mr. Newman and I had extensive discussions yesterday, maybe 45 minutes or so. So the hearing should be relatively not as drawn out as usual. And I think there's 3 or 4 recommendations on here. So that will make the process a bit easier for all of us. And with that being said, the first one, there will be a recommendation on that. The file number is 22-2793. Roll number is 07022585000 on 1835 Sargent. The initial value was $3,438,000. And the applicant and I have agreed to $3,203,000.
Mr. Newman, are you in agreement?
I am.
Bill, any questions in regards to the recommendation?
No question.
Mr. McPherson?
Yeah, I'd just like to know what the recommendation is based on.
We did a slight change to the market rent. And all of the city of Winnipeg parameters.
That's with 3% expenses?
Yep.
Thank you.
So be it. I think that concludes that part of it. So we'll go to the next property, which is 1169 Sherwin Road. Mr. Fowler, whenever you're ready.
File number is 22-2919. Roll number is 07050753,500. The assessed value was $6,969,000, and the applicant and I have agreed to $6.4 million.
Mr. Newman?
I agree.
Thank you. Mr. Boretsky, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. McPherson?
Clarification, once again, that's on adjusted
Market rent. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I have no further questions, so we'll go to 1110 Sanford Street.
Yes.
Paul, or yours?
Depending on one's opinion, the party's just starting or the party's ending. There will not be, I've made a recommendation on this property, but Mr. Newman has rejected it. File number is 22-2940. Roll number is 13001510000. Subject property is on 1110 Sanford Street. The assessed value was at $2,244,000, and my recommendation was at $2,025,000, and that was based on vacancy. 19 different premises here. Original building was built in 1963, and the effective age is 1963. The building is a bit older and dated. The wall height is 14 feet. And what we have here in terms of a plan, the land area is 73,658, and the leasable area is 32,200. The land to plan rate, the building ratio is only 2.27. But that's usually the case there. It has been a bit lower on these industrial strip malls. And so I'm very much fine with this, this land to building ratio. What we have here is on the property owner has been compliant with regards to keeping the income and expense mailer. And below you'll have a history of all the expenses and all the rents that we have listed in, have listed here. Majority of the rents are net, and you can see them on page 2. Property has a sale history. Property sold most recently on April 6, 2009 for $1,310,000. What I've done here is because there is some vacancy in this building, so we pulled some files that we have from February 2nd, 2021 of industrial space that they're leasing here. The industrial flex space for this unit that I see on page 3 is $6.25. It has the area is in a great area. It's in the St. James Industrial Park area. Easy access to Empress and St. James. Close to the airport, and also close proximity to the Polo Park Shopping Center to the other amenities in the area. What we have here is we have shown a couple spaces that are for lease. One of them is 1,200 square feet. The other one's 4,901. And here's an example of the leasable, the rent that they're looking for at $6.25 a square foot, which is higher than what the city of Winnipeg is seeking. On the bottom part of page 4, you can see some of the spaces where there are where they're looking for the tenants. Some additional information here with regards to the quality of the space here. Just showing we have the effective age as being 1963, but overall the space looks a bit more modern than a 1963 space with I think it may be laminate floors. But obviously on page 5, the pictures don't look of 1963 vintage. Some additional pictures that I have on page 6. And on page 7. So some of the subject property leases that we were able to get up from the property, showing a range between $6 and $7.50 a square foot. And on the top of page 8 shows you where the property is located at. Sargent, Everest, St. James, decent location. An overview of all the properties that we have here, showing the 19 different premises that we have listed here, showing a range of rents of $4.11 to $5.46, or maybe even $5.90. Yep, there's nothing in the $6 range for our model generated rents. And we have a leasable area of 32,200 with a GPI of 178,734. What we've done here is we initially had a 7% vacancy. I did adjust that to 12%. And looking at the numbers here, just bear with me here for 1 sec. Thought I had to work up here, but for the recommendation, I had changed the vacancy rate from 7% to 12. And that's how I came up with the 2,025,000. Getting back to the effective gross income, we came up with 166,223 under the old system. The net operating income was 152. We used the 6.8% cap rate, and we came up with 2,244,000. And just bear with me here for 1 sec. File open. I just want to make sure I have good information for you guys with regards to what I had done on the Sanford property. So with the 12% vacancy, my net operating income was 137,670. So if we go 137,670. That's how I come up with the $2,025,000. So what we have in the neighborhood is I've selected rents, all in the St. James Industrial Park area, on Keith Road, on Dublin, on Notre Dame, Dublin. They're all similar sizes, between 2,000 square feet and 4605 square up to 5,000 square feet. And we have a range of rents from $5.25 to $6. So I believe the rents that we're using for the subject property is reasonable. Capitalization rates. So when we look at the capitalization rates, we've provided a 1-page summary of the information showing the type of cap rates that we use. For this property, the range would be like industrial B, multi-tenanted industrial B. The range is from 6.55 to 7.45. We're using 6.8. The pictures of from the leasable area says that this property, it has its issues, but there are some positive aspects of this property as well, which is why we feel comfortable with a 6.8% cap rate. And in terms of detailed analysis, some agents believe that, you know, the city of Winnipeg should go into greater detail with regards to what we've done. But all the information that we do with regards to creating the assessment role is we do a vacancy analysis, we do a cap rate analysis, and we go through the due diligence of this process. The venue that we have here to discuss this more thoroughly is not conducive to doing 8 properties in one morning. So Officially, that's an overview of the capitalization process that we use. And the same analysis goes through with regards to the non-recoveries, where we did increase it from last cycle from 2% to 3%. Thank you very much, and I'm open to questions.
I thank you. Mr. Newman, questions of the assessor?
Yes. So again, Mr. Froelich, thank you, and thank you for the discussions yesterday. So let's try and be efficient on this one. You've looked at the vacancy history of the property, correct?
Yes, I have.
And it is substantially more than 7%, which I believe is what caused you to increase it to 12. Is that fair?
That is correct.
And in fact, it's substantially more than 12. And for all of 2018, 2019, and 2020, correct?
Yes, but after our discussion yesterday, I actually did a more further analysis. And then I also looked at the 2015, 2016, and 2017 vacancy for this property. And in 2015, the vacancy was 0%. In 2016, the vacancy was 6.2%. And 2017, the vacancy is 11.35%. And then subsequently in 2021, it's at 10%. So when I did the analysis after our conversation yesterday, I feel very comfortable with the 12% that I'd used for this property.
Okay. So in terms of capitalization rate, I think you said earlier, if I heard you correctly, that there's a range for B industrial based on your chart. I think you said 6.55 to 7.45. I think the chart indicates 5.55 to 7.45. But in any event, you're indicating you put this one at 6.8.
That's correct.
This subject property is at 6.8, correct?
That is correct.
And in terms of the attributes of industrial properties, you've noted this one has a land to plan area of 2.27.
That's correct.
That's not ideal from an industrial perspective, is it?
If it was truly industrial property, it is, but it's essentially a retail strip mall. And retail strip malls are like, even so when we look at the product type for this property, we have this property as a flex warehouse. So a flex warehouse consists of, and for this one here, consists of 19 different units. Land to building ratio is not an issue here as significant because there are zoning requirements that it has to be evolved through. And land to building ratio is not as important for these type of properties as they may be with some other ones. However, with that being said, there are many examples within the city of Winnipeg where businesses and property owners have made this decision to disregard land to building ratio standards that we use to have lower ratios to suit their business operations. Is it ideal? No, but but what happens if there's less space on the outside, there's more space on the inside. And as long as there's good access to that, to the doors and for trucks to get through, then I don't think this is an issue. And a great example of that is with 1835 Sargent that we looked earlier on today. The land to building ratio is around 3.3, but there's a lot of good access to that property. And with regards to 1835 Sargent, the initial building was around 50,000 square feet. And then they did a 30,000 square feet addition in 1987. So in 1987, if land to building was the be all end all for that property type, then why would they have done the 30,000 square foot expansion? And I have lots of other examples with regards to that, with regards to Sobeys, Burnaby Farms, some Arctis Reese properties, where they've expanded their operations and they have disregarded land to building. So to answer your question, I don't think land to building ratio is an issue here.
Mr. Froelich, my question was actually a simple one, but thank you for all of that.
Oh, but it's important to know the history, Mr. Newman. Right?
My question was simply that in the relative ranking of industrial properties, you would agree that a 2.27 land to building ratio is not ideal.
I disagree with that.
In the hypothetical sense, you disagree?
I disagree with that any day of the week.
All right.
With regards
Next
to flex,
question.
with regards to flex warehouse properties,
Next
but even
question,
then, so with
Mr.
regards to other
Mr.
properties as
Froelich.
well.
Mr. Froelich, you've had your turn. You'll get more turns. Just listen to the question. You're telling us the wall height is 14 feet, correct?
That is correct.
That means the clear span height is less than that, correct?
Yeah, probably 12 feet.
Right. Again, in the ideal world, a 12-foot clear span is not ideal, correct?
Depending upon the type of business. This is not a manufacturing storage warehouse. This is an industrial strip mall where the majority of the spaces are 1,500 or under 1,500 square feet. When I look at this, probably 60% of them, if not higher, is 12 feet high. For an industrial strip mall, ceiling height's not an issue.
Well, it's good to know that nothing's an issue, but I appreciate
Well,
that.
no,
Thank
for
you.
this type of property in these circumstances, it's not like you have storage space or manufacturing or warehousing taking place here.
Have you inspected the property?
Only with the pictures that I have seen.
All right, thank you. You put some listing material from the brochure from Colliers. So clearly ownership is actively trying to market the property. You would agree?
I would agree.
And the non-recoverable expense allowance, 3%. And Mr. McPherson, Mr. Merritt, I know you guys have heard this lots in the past. I don't want to belabor this issue. I suspect it's new for Mr. Moretsky. But let me ask the question, Mr. Froelich. Historically, and I'll ask just a couple questions. Historically, the city allowed both a 5% and a 2% deduction from effective gross income, correct?
Correct.
And for the 2020 cycle, that became a 2% deduction only, correct?
Correct.
And for the 2023 cycle, that's become a 3% deduction.
Correct.
And the purpose of the non-recoverable expense allowance is to recognize the fact that landlords do not recover all expenses from tenants.
That's the premise. Correct.
And there are a variety of types of expenses that they don't recover. Those are detailed in my submission. I'm not going to go into them in any significant way. But again, those will be things like structural repairs.
Yes.
Those will be things like leasing commissions.
But for assessment purposes at municipal boards, we don't look at leasing commissions and tenant inducements for valuation purposes.
Sure. And again, that wasn't my question though, but I appreciate your view. My question was simply leasing commissions are a type of non-recoverable expense, correct?
Correct.
All right. Professional fees for audit, for example, those are non-recoverable.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
All right. And this concept of non-recoverable expenses, it's recognized by the city of Winnipeg. It's recognized by other assessment authorities, correct?
Correct.
Our issue is the amount. It's the quantum that we're just in dispute about, correct?
Correct.
All right. I'll leave it there. Thank you. Those are my questions. Wait. Actually, just let me look at my notes. Sorry. So you noted at the outset that this building is 1963 built and a 1963 effective age. And you explained that your recommendation was driven by an increase in the vacancy to 12%. Correct?
That is correct. But even though looking at the pictures, you could confidently say that this property doesn't have a 1963 vintage.
Well, you could confidently say that about the one unit that you
I think there's 2 units here, Mr. Newman.
in the picture, but why don't you look at your page 7 and tell me what you think about those pictures?
Well, that door doesn't look, that garage door, the walls don't look 1963. Well, maybe the outside does, yeah. But it looks pretty basic. Like that aspect of it is a bit larger, and it's 3,600 square feet. So
Right.
yeah, so that one's that's not similar to the other 60% of the properties that are less than 1,500 square feet.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Mr. McPherson, questions of Mr. Pollock?
Just a couple, thank you, Mr. Chair. What is the overall rate that you've applied to this property, Mr. Furlock?
$5.55.
$5.55, thank you. And the cap rate of 6.8%.
Yeah.
When I refer to your chart, I see the city of Winnipeg has a range of, we said multi-tenant, 5.55 to 7.45, but that's the 20th percentile to the 80th percentile, correct?
That's correct.
And the other ones, Colliers, CBR, Cushman, Wakefield, that's just for reference, but those are lows and highs, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So we're not really comparing apples to apples there. So there is, do you know what the city of Winnipeg low to high range is for multi-tenant?
For multi-tenanted B, because a part of it, when we look at cap rates, we look at areas as well, right? So because this location of this property is in a superior area, it's not like, say, for example, in the Jarvis Industrial Park, Point Douglas area. But actually, when I look at that, the low range for this would be 6.45, 7.45, 7.45 for this type of property.
And the high would be?
Oh, the high would be, just roughly speaking, would be around 6%.
Okay. And I don't want to compare assessments, but seeing how you referred to 1835 Sargent, that one was a 7.5% cap rate.
Yeah.
And the reasoning for that is that much about the same vintage and.
Well, the size is significantly different. The size of the Sargent property is like over 80,000 square feet. So size matter when it comes to cap rates.
Okay, but does land to building also fall into?
Well, because they're different type of properties. The
So
Sargent property.
1835 isn't like a flex warehouse type thing?
No, it's a true warehouse.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Let me just double check. Steve.
Thank you. Mr. Moratsky, questions?
Yeah, so you have it listed a parcel use here as a warehouse. So that just encompasses what you were talking about before, industrial warehouse and flex warehouses.
Well, they're all a part of the industrial property groups, but there's different types of industrial properties out there, right? So if we look at the big three, we have manufacturing, we have warehouses, and we have flex warehouses that are a part of our portfolio with some others. If I want to be generic in our three main product groupings that we have in the industrial categories.
So what would be the typical land to building? Is that the way it goes? Land to building or building to land?
Land to building ratio, yeah.
Land to building ratio for those three categories that you kind of mentioned.
Well, what we have here is that we know for flex warehouses, they're significantly lower. Right. And then for the other two property types, in a perfect world, they're 4-to-1, but that's not always the case, because if a property owner has decided to expand upon it, what we've learned is that there's been situations whereby we've had warehouse types, like I'm thinking of a warehouse on off of Barrie towards Red River Community College, where they had a low land to building ratio, and they even made it lower to expand their businesses. But the point is, it didn't affect the trucks because it was on a side street, which was quite quiet in nature, and that the trucks had easy access to the property. So, as a lot of things in assessment, there's a lot of gray areas, and so this is one of them. But historically speaking, when I look at land to building ratios for flex warehouses, those are land to building ratios are lower. Because they'd rather have leasable units than parking.
So there wouldn't be an expectation on a client or a tenant that they would be able to offload semi-trailers, for instance.
Yeah, that's the biggest issue, is that they need to have that ability to offload semi-trailers. But with regards to 60% of the properties here being less than 1,500 square feet, most of them are office or retail in nature, or a retail component of it.
But they could offload semi-trailers then if they.
Not on this
property.
because if we look at the pictures again, let me just double check here.
Doesn't look like it from the picture.
Yeah, it doesn't, because
Street.
it's very simplistic on nature. We have a similar type of properties on Bradford, I guess, that are very like that as well.
And you go on the cap rate of 6.8%.
That is correct.
And for a flex warehouse, that's about like it's for an average type of thing, or
It's actually below average.
below average.
Yeah, like they use the semi trucks here, and that's why I was saying with regards to land to building ratios, like there's no access, for it. They have smaller trucks. They have unloading for smaller vehicles, probably for 5-10 trucks, but nothing for 18-wheelers.
Okay, no further questions.
Thank you. Mr. Frolick, the city for chronic vacancies, they go up to 25% vacancy.
Yeah, and that 25% vacancy, that's where almost the value becomes nil when you're doing the analysis for this type of property.
So would you classify this as chronic?
Oh, definitely not, because when I showed the trend beforehand in 2015, 2016, when I did a 5-year analysis of this, because the mailers that are we using are from 2020. And so from 2020, if I go backwards from 5 years, starting at 2015, the vacancy was 0. Then in 2016, the vacancy was, I have it here. So where did I put it? Oh, here it is. In 2015, it was 0. 2016, it was 6.21%. 2017, it was 11.3%. And then the next 2 years are really, really big. The next 3 years were big. 44% in 18, 37% in 19, and then in 20, it was 39%. So I'm being very mindful of this. And then in 2021, it's at 10%. And when we look at vacancy analysis, even when industrial properties have been vacated, have never been vacated, they've been owner occupied. 65% of the properties in industrial are owner occupied. There's 0 vacancy, but we still allow a market vacancy when there are situations that take place when there is. And I am mindful of that. But the point is, so even when there's a blip here where there's a trend for 3 years and then it sort of reverts, because similar to the stock market going up and down, vacancy goes up and down. And in this circumstances here, it has stabilized in 2021. So that's why I felt comfortable with the 12% that I've offered here today.
Yeah, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of logic behind when you did your original evaluation at a vacancy of 7%, and then you only go up 5%.
Well, the point is that it was a model generated for the area, and I've almost doubled it. And I've looked at the trend here. So even in 2015 and 2016, when there were very low vacancy rates, we still used either 4 or 5%. I don't know what we used in 2016 for industrial properties then, but we would have offered some vacancy. You're always going to expect vacancy to take place and property types. And so I felt comfortable with the vacancy that I've offered here today.
All right.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I'm sorry, may I just have a follow-up question on that, please?
go ahead, Stu. Yeah.
If a property is 100% vacant, what is the vacancy that it's applied to that property?
We use the model generated vacancy rate.
If it's been 100% vacant for.
Oh, 100%. Well, sorry, I misinterpreted that. What we'd use is, well, we would use a 25% vacancy in those circumstances. But it would have to be at least over 5 years of chronic vacancy. And at that point, then maybe we're looking at the highest and best use for that property. Maybe that property is at the end of its effective life. You know, there's a lot of varieties to that. So there's not one standard answer for that question. But usually with regards to chronic vacancy, yes, using that highest rate. And even at that highest rate, we're reluctant to use that 25%. Right?
I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you. Mr. Newman, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Let me start with the vacancy. And as most of the people in this room know, I've been coming here a long time, probably as long as Mr. Froelich. I've never heard an assessor say before that you look at 5-year vacancy to determine whether it's chronic. I've always understood you look at 2 years of history to determine whether it's chronic. And but I hear what Mr. Froelich says. So I've taken his numbers. We should ignore 2021, first of all. But I've taken his numbers going back to 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. And in my submission at PDF page 3, I address the issue of vacancy towards the bottom of the page. And I point out that vacancy is 39.51% in 2020, 37.16% in 2019, and 44.73% in 2018. Now, Mr. Froelich will tell us that the land to building ratio is irrelevant, that ceiling height is irrelevant. Well, something is relevant in terms of causing this property to encounter difficulties in leasing up, notwithstanding the use of marketing agents like Colliers. Because I don't think it's irrelevant. I think it is a factor. There's always a spectrum of quality of buildings. Let's not lose sight of that. You know, they go from good, better, best, to be generous, and the best have much higher ceilings. The best have much larger land to building ratios. The best have a variety of things. This one is not the best. And the vacancy exemplifies that. But if I take the 6 years of vacancy that Mr. Froehlinger has talked about, ignoring 2021, I get an average of 32.45%. And as you will see at the end of the day, I used a 15, well, actually, I gave you 2 numbers. I gave you a 15% vacancy, and I gave you a 20% vacancy, and I gave you 2 different numbers, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But I just wanted to mention that at this point, since we've been talking about vacancy. At the end of the day, the differences between our respective valuations are essentially, as they sometimes are, there are 4 things: the gross potential income, the vacancy, the non-recoverable allowance, is it 3% or is it higher, and the capitalization rate. So maybe the easiest thing to do is to jump ahead to the very last page of my submission. And that will be numbered 40, not PDF 40. I've learned a lesson about this process and how my page numbers need to be consistent with the PDF page numbers. They will be better. My submissions are better for the future. But this is the very last page. What I've done there is I've reflected the rents in place. And Mr. McPherson, you asked Mr. Froehlinger what his rate was, and he told you it was $5.55 a square foot, minus $5.25 a square foot at the end of the day by using the variety of rents in place. So you can see that's what I have. So at the end of the day, we have a difference in gross potential income of about $8,000. That's one of our differences. Then on the vacancy, I told you I've done two scenarios. I've done a 20% scenario. That's what you see on page 40 in the lower right-hand corner. If you come back one page, you'll see I've used a 15% scenario. And I'll leave you to hold those thoughts. Then I've used a 7% non-recoverable allowance. And let me speak to that for a couple of moments. And again, I will not belabor this. I know Mr. Merritt and Mr. McPherson, you've heard lots of this, but I have a separate submission on non-recoverables. And if you can perhaps, if you all have that, and I'll do this once, even though we have other properties that are in dispute, I'll just turn the pages and do it once. So if you can tell me that you have it and we're good to look at it.
We'll wait for a second.
Is there,
It's at the, I think it's at the bottom.
It's a separate document
It's
called
called-
non-recoverable
Yeah,
expense
it's
submission.
at the very bottom.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Stu, you okay?
One moment, please.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, and again, I'm not going to belabor this. So PDF page number 2 is the beginning. And what I start out with is right above the heading appraisal methodology. There's a quote from the evaluation of income producing models, a manual rather generated by the city. Net operating income is potential annual income minus vacancy and collection loss minus non-recoverable operating expenses. So as Mr. Prolinger, sorry, Mr. Froelich, different guy Prolinger, as
He's done
Mr.
that twice.
Froelich, as Mr. Froelich fairly acknowledged earlier, it's not the concept that we're in disagreement about, it's the amount at the end of the day. So I give you excerpts. If you go to the next page, which will be PDF page 3, I give you excerpts from appraisal textbooks. The quote at the middle of the page, most important non-recoverable item to be aware of, space marketing costs, which include both tenant inducements, leasing costs, and an allowance for structural or mechanical repairs. The Sauder School of Business is to the same effect. Down at the bottom of that page and onto the next page, I've got a series of bullets that lists the different kinds of expenses that can get taken into account. I don't tell you they should all be taken into account for our purposes. So depreciation and mortgage interest, for example, I would never use that, but that's what the textbooks list. Then at PDF page 4, I talk about the historic allowances, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail there other than to say up until 2020, there was a 7% deduction. It changed to 2%. Now it's changed to 3%. Let's keep going to PDF page 6. Other assessment authorities, the Saskatchewan Assessment Management Agency, SAMA, again talks about the non-recoverable operating expenses, and it talks over onto the next page. It categorizes, so PDF page 7, and there's a list there: legal and audit fees, structural repairs, advertising and promotion, leasing commissions. I know the city takes a different view about leasing commissions. That's not appraisal methodology, but again, I'm just showing you what Saskatchewan has to say. MPAC, which is the Ontario Assessing Authority, they have similar things to say. If you go to page 8, non-recoverable operating expenses such as legal and audit fees, advertising, promotional fees. So again, the point is that, and that's as far as I'm going to go. I'm not going to take you into the text. So I've done an analysis, and at the end of the day, and I'll show you a little bit more detail. We can come back to my main brief. I'll show you a little bit more detail in this regard. So if we go to PDF page 3, in the main brief down at the bottom, non-recoverable expenses. Let me know, first of all, there's 3 separate buildings on this site. Therefore, there's 3 separate roofs. It's always going to cost more money to deal with 3 roofs than it is with 1 roof of the equivalent size, because roofing contractors have to mobilize every time they go up onto a roof. So that turns into money. But there's a roofing report, which is attached at pages 20 to 38. I think they are probably PDF pages 31 to 48, I believe. So this is a roofing report done in June of this year, so it's quite current. And what it does is it identifies the cost of replacing the roof. So the first page of the report, I think, might be PDF page 30. Is that correct?
Looks like it, yeah.
So you can see that for the roof at 1110, 1122 Sanford, right at the end of that description and paragraph, it talks about approximately $105,000 of cost to replace that roof, noting it's generally in poor condition. And then it goes on when it gets to, I think would be the last page of the text of the report, probably page 32, right at the end, there's miscellaneous repairs of $25,000. My point simply is that the assessor's 3% allowance is $4,987. If you got to do the roof, and if you've got $105,000 to $130,000 of repairs at approximately $5,000 per year, it's going to cost 20 to 25 years to cover the cost of the roof. That's not going to give you anything for the parking lot. That's not going to give you anything for other structural repairs for which landlords are responsible, or audit fees, or leasing commissions, which I acknowledge is disputed. The point is that 3% is not enough. I've used 7%. Okay, capitalization rate, 6.8%. The assessor has used, I think that's too low for this building. So at page 5, I believe, PDF page 5 of my main report, I talk about how you need to categorize buildings, and there's a spectrum, and clear ceiling clearance or clear height. This one is going to have about 12 feet clear. Mr. Frolinger will say that's irrelevant. Well, it's not irrelevant with respect. It's relevant for users because the more clear ceiling height they've got, the more materials they can store, whatever those materials might be. This one will have no loading docks, of course. So that means to the extent the trucks, and let's note these are garage doors. These are not traditional loading doors that you'd see in a more modern warehouse. But from an efficiency perspective, there's no grade level loading docks here. Trucks are going to have to come in, items are going to have to be downloaded. So that's less efficient. Land to building ratio, as the assessor notes, ideal is 4 to 1. Here we've got 2.27. The loading doors I talked about, column-free bays. This one might actually not be bad because of the size of the units. So my point simply is that at the end of the day, I don't believe that this is a 6.8 cap rate. If you look at my next page, which will be PDF page 6, so I referenced there some of the broker capitalization rates. And first of all, let me say that I don't believe this is a B-class building. I think it's below. But you see that CBRE is at 6.5, 7.25. You see that Colliers is at 6 to 6.75 on the B. Remember, there's an issue about the methodology by which Colliers calculates their capitalization rates because they include closing costs. So that range should actually be higher. Cushman is showing for B 6 to 6.5. The city shows 5.5 to 7.45 at the 20th and 80th. Again, I think this building is much closer to the 80th than it is to the 20th. So at the end of the day, what I say about this building, and now I'm on to page 8 of the PDF. So if you look at the attributes of this building, land to building ratio is low, lower ceiling heights, vacancy history. It's got a roof condition issue. So my view overall is that the market would perceive this building at a 7.5% capitalization rate. So now I'm going to take you back to the last 2 pages of my submission where I have the 2 different spreadsheets, because remember I told you earlier I used a 15% and I used a 20% vacancy with my rents. So that creates an $8,000 approximately difference between our GPIs, 15% or 20% vacancy, 385 shortfall, 7% non-recoverable. And that gives me an NOI of either 115 with a 15% vacancy or 101 with a 20% vacancy. Capitalizing at 7.5 creates a range of values 1,347,000 to 1,534,000. And I suggested we go with the midpoint of 1,440,000. So subject to questions, those are my submissions.
Thank you. Mr. Pollock, questions of the applicant?
Yep, for sure. So on page 39 of your brief, the paper copy, which is like the second last page.
Yeah.
Are the majority of the rents listed on here higher than $5.55?
Yes.
Okay, what percentage approximately?
Quick eyeball, 80%, 85%.
Okay, and so the ones that are much lower than that, the ones that you have on your mailer here, are those reflective of market conditions for that area, for this area? I'm looking at, there's 4 spaces here that that have 26% of the actual leasable area for the subject property.
Here's what I'll say to you, Mr. Froelich. If you adjust it upwards, those few rents that are below to by $3, for example, or $4, I think our GPIs are going to come to essentially the same number.
But GPI, okay. But the point is, you're using a GPI of 169. I'm just, okay, well, I just clicked the last one and we have a GPI of 178. So $10,000 does make a difference to GPI, or $9,000.
I agree.
Yep. Okay. Just including that.
Yeah.
Is this the original roof on the building?
Since 1963?
Yep.
No.
Okay. So would that indicate, and with the pictures that we've seen, would that indicate that the effective age should be a lot greater than what we have stated here at 1963?
No, I think keeping your roof in a reasonable condition makes the premises habitable.
Okay.
It doesn't improve the quality of the space.
So, but is a roofing a capital cost, or is that a business expense?
Well, I'm not sure what your question means exactly, but I'll answer it this way. When you do a roof repair, that's an expense. When you do a roof replacement, that's a capital item.
Okay. So would the roof repair on the owner be a capital expenditure then?
In the ideal world, a roof repair is something that can be passed through to a tenant.
Okay.
And that's why my focus is on the need for replacement.
But, and so in terms of, if there was a brand new roof on this property, would the cap rate be would be reduced?
Would the cap rate be reduced?
Would the cap rate go down if there was a brand new roof on this property?
No, I don't think it would. So here's what I'll say to you. And because here's what happens with the issue of the non-recoverable allowance. The lower the non-recoverable allowance, the higher the net operating income. If the price remains static, then that impacts the capitalization rate, obviously. So when your NOI is down because your allowance is higher, your capitalization rate will come up. Uh-oh.
They can hear you.
I understand. With regards to this type of building here, in the same St. James Industrial Park area, are there a lot of buildings that have, 24 feet ceiling heights that are flex warehouses? Or is that standard in the neighborhood what we have here right now?
I'm going to say you have a variety of buildings, obviously the bigger buildings and some of the other buildings on the docket today.
Yeah.
You mentioned 1835, quite large. Sherwin Road, quite large. Will come to Century, quite large. So, those are large buildings which will have larger units, for example, much larger units. The subject property tends to have smaller units. There are some other buildings like that on the docket today as well.
Yeah. And so, but the smaller units usually lead to lower, in some circumstances in this area. Is it fair to say that the smaller units are conducive to the business for this type of building in the St. James Industrial Park?
Well, generally tenants try and go to facilities that suit their needs. So I would agree with that concept in a general sort of way.
Okay. Roughly speaking, are there a lot of properties in the St. James area that sell for $41 or $42 a square foot?
I don't have that information.
Thank you. That concludes my questions.
Thank you. Mr. McPherson, questions, please?
I think I know the points Mr. Newman is making. I think your final statement was that you're thinking the appropriate value is somewhere in the midpoint of the two calculations you've done at 1,440,000, correct?
That's correct.
So does that basically, everything else being equal, does that equate to a vacancy rate of about 17.5% that you're applying?
So you cut out just for a moment. Can you state your question again?
If your two ranges or your two values were 15% vacancy and 20% vacancy, correct?
Yes.
So if you're suggesting the midpoint, would that equate to a 17.5% vacancy rate? Everything else being equal?
Yeah, I probably would.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was my only clarification.
I thank you. Mr. Moratsky?
So for the roof, would you say that this roof type is typical for pretty much any warehouse system in the city?
So I would say that at one time, tar and gravel was very, very, very common for warehouse buildings. I would say in the last 10 to 15 years, you've started to see a lot more what I'll call torch-on, where they roll out the sheets and then they take a flamethrower essentially to them and they heat them and they bind, they glue the sheets together. So you start to see more of that. But I would say to you, on the bigger warehouse buildings, the tar and gravel continues to be more prevalent.
And what would be a typical lifespan of that type of roof in this climate?
So historically, the rule of thumb was 20 years. People who spend a lot more money in terms of remedial work can perhaps get 25 years out of it, but somewhere in that range.
So your argument earlier was that the expense ratio, is that what could you call it that? The
Expense
non-recoverable,
yes.
non-recoverable should be around 5%.
Actually, I asked for 7%.
So, and that's because of the roof.
No, well, the roof, so the point is that non-recoverables cover a spectrum of things, which I've listed and we've talked about. This one happens to have a roof problem at the present time, but those will come and go, obviously. Right. But over the long-term life of a building, what you really do in the ideal world is you create an annual reserve for things like that, and you build it into the calculation. We tend not to do that. So, but you have to recognize that it will be there over the life of the building. And when they're done with this one in 5 years or 8 years or 10 years, a roof on the other building will get done. And then in 5 more years, the roof on the third building will get done. The point is that they're continuously going to have, let's call it $5,000 a year on account of roof replacements. They're going to have structural repairs on top of that. They're going to have leasing commissions, which I know the assessor doesn't agree with, but they're going to have a variety of these expenses. The parking lot, they're always going to be there. And so that's why I'm going to the higher amount. So it's not just because of the roof. The roof gets attention in this circumstance because of the example, but it's because of the spectrum of those expenses.
So would it be fair to say that another part of your argument, though, is that expense allowance that the city makes for these warehouses is never enough?
Never enough. And it's not just warehouses. It's all types of commercial properties.
But this one you're saying is a little bit more than what you're stating is normal, like a couple of points higher. Okay, fair enough. That's my only question.
Okay, thank you. Either party want summation?
No.
Nope.
Okay. Let's do one more and then we'll have a break. 1150 St. James Street.
That's an easy one.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Pollock.
Just let me get my information here, please.
Yeah.
So. File number is 22-2827. Roll number is 07001517,000. Initially, the assessed value was $1,085,000. And just for educational purposes, building built in 1969. This one has a 17 feet walling height, low land to building ratio. But the agent and I have agreed to $930,000.
Mr. Newman.
Agreed.
Panel members, any questions? Sue?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like clarification on how that 930,000 was arrived at.
The applicant and I agreed to the value on this, just the number.
Okay, the overall value is what you agreed upon.
Yeah, is 930.
Okay, thank you.
And if possible, just for our purposes, because Mr. Newman hasn't done this, but a lot of other agents have, where there have been joint recommendations made at hearings. And I understand that the owners do have the right to take it to a higher level court, but my preference is that in all the orders, could I have that the applicant and the agent have agreed to the value stated at the hearing? Is that possible, Mr.
I
Chair?
don't know what you mean by that, Mr.
Well,
Fowler.
what has happened right now is our workload has increased threefold in the past couple of years. And what has happened in the orders, what has happened is in good faith and goodwill, and this is not applicable to Mr. Newman, is that we've made recommendations, joint recommendations at hearings. And we've seen a lot of properties where there've been joint recommendations made and that they've gone to the second level to the municipal board. And so what has happened is the assessment department's mindful that the applicant has the right to appeal it to the higher level court. But we've found in the past that there was a significant amount of appeals that were at the Board of Revision where there was a joint value agreed upon that we're taking to a higher level court. And so in a perfect world, we would do 15 ones for all these properties, but that's not applicable because the workload from the assessment side of things is very significant and time may not allow for 15-1 to take place. So my preference is that if these values, and this is not applicable to Mr. Newman because Mr. Newman and I have had this conversation, but for other ones moving forward, for just generally, I would prefer that if possible. Is that too much to ask?
Okay, can I just make a comment? First of all, I appreciate Mr. Froehlich's observations about my relationship with he and others in the department. Having said that, but the point he's made at the end is a good one. He and I have this conversation midday yesterday. We're both squeezed for time. We don't have time to bring forward 15 ones. It also creates issues on my side in terms of my ability to finalize instructions for 9 a.m. this morning. So certainly I told Mr. Froehlich, if you're making a recommendation and I am not in a position to accept it, like the last property we dealt with, then you'll hear from me on that. Otherwise, I'm going to accept the recommendation with the full expectation that I won't be taking it higher. But again, I just want to qualify that sometimes there's not an ability to get final instructions from the client. So I'd be hesitant to have that type of reference in the order.
So, Mr. Newman, how would it be worded then?
Well, it'd be worded simply that the assessor made a recommendation.
And it's accepted?
Yes.
Okay, period.
Yeah.
Okay. That's no problem.
With that being said, though, moving forward, these hearings may become a lot longer because we won't be as open to, not in Mr. Newman's case here, because today's hearings will be relatively quick, but for some other ones, there may be a reluctance to make recommendations because we know if, we've had situations in the past where there's been, a 10 to 15% cut at a Board of Revision hearing. The agent wanted a 25% cut and they only got 10% or 12%. So they'll take it to the municipal board for another 8%. And they have the right to do that. But from our perspective, it makes the process a lot harder because we'll have to go through longer hearings.
Well, I'm just, Mr. Frolick, I think when the order comes out, I'd like to keep it as simple as possible. And that both parties agree or the applicants accepted the offer, So,
well, but there's a matter of goodwill that has been lost since the previous cycle. And which is why I've made the following suggestion.
okay. We'll leave it at such.
Okay.
You want to go on to the next property on Century, or do
I
you want
thought
to
you
have
had
a
suggested
break?
another break.
We can take a probably like a 10-minute break.
Sounds good to me.
5, 10?
10's good.
Okay. All right, we'll call the hearing back to order. And we will go to the next property on the docket, which is 1007 Century Street. Mr. Frolick, the floor is yours, sir.
Yep, for sure. File number is 22-2051. roll number 0701001200. The assessed value that we had for this property is $8,794,000. Mr. Newman and I had some discussions on this property before yesterday. And so based on that conversation, I came up with a recommendation that I would like to make, which has been rejected. But for the record, I'd like to state that the assessed value for this property, that the recommendation that we make is $7,614,000.
And it was rejected, not agreed upon?
Not agreed upon.
All right, continue on.
Yep, I just wanted to state for the record. Okay, looking at this property here, we have 7 different PIDs. Property's been built between 1972 and 1988. Wall heights are between 20 and 21 feet. And the land area is 235,000 approximately. And the land to building ratio is 2.92. But I want to, before I go forward here, looking at the nature of this property, compared it to the Sanford property, is that the ceiling heights are much higher. So when you have higher ceiling heights, that usually translates to higher rents. And that's been the case for this property. What's interesting about the just under land to building ratio of 2.92 is that in 1980, there was an expansion of this property where they had added on 4,600 square feet to this. So if the property was already very low in land to building ratio, in the applicant's point of view, not from the assessor's point of view, why would they expand upon it, right? So what we're looking at here is that the majority of this property here, it's another flex warehouse where it doesn't have a significant amount of space, and it is newer, and the rents are higher. Moving to page 2, what we have here is that the property owner has been compliant with income and expense mailer. And before I move forward, if you look on the far right-hand side, all the ticketed rents for this property is $8 a square foot. On the recommendation that I've made here, I've used $7.13 a square foot, being mindful of the fact that I wasn't going to use actuals because the actuals in place are not indicative of the marketplace. So, and you'll see my comparables later on, but what I have done is I have adjusted the market rents where they're applicable in my recommendation. And so, for example, where there was a historically low rent of $4.75 used by the applicant, I bumped that up to $6 a square foot. So what we have here is you can see all the ticketed rents at $8, and the actuals are a bit lower, but which is reflective in my recommendation of $7.13. The property vacancy is 5.2% from the 2020 mailer. And I do not believe there's an issue with regards to that we're not debating vacancy with this property. In our discussions yesterday with Mr. Newman, there was a sale on record. It is post-reference, but it's not applicable, which is why it's all blacked out here. Subject property pictures. So on page 3, you can see the nature of the building. It is also another flex warehouse, so it has a lot of flexibility. The building size is 80,000 square feet. And what happens is with the range of properties that we have, or the spaces, are between 4,000 and 24,000 square feet. You can see, so it's a nice newer building in a great location on Route 90. I was not able to find any recent listings for this property with regards to the quality of the space, but what I do have on page 4 is I do show one picture of one of the spaces that are listed here. And if you look at the top of page 5, when we talked about land to building ratio, the building addition that took place in 1980 is on the northwest corner of the building. So because this property is a unique shape, they added the 4,600 square feet to the property on the northeast corner. On the bottom of page 5, we have a listing of all the leases that we have on file. on our system showing a lease rate of $4.60 to $8. Initially, on my recommendation, I had changed the rents from a range of $6 to $8. And my GP and my gross potential income right now is $572,612. Using a 7% vacancy, the effective market income was $532,529. Using shortfall of $385 and other at 3%, I came up with a net operating income of $494,917. Using a cap rate of 6.5%, I came up with a value of $7,614,000, which is about $1 million cut from the original model value. So what I've done here is, with regards to the subject property, I have a range of rents here. All St. James, Dublin, Keith, St. James, Wellington, Notre Dame, King Edward, all within the area. The spaces are between 4,000 and 11,000 square feet. Similar wall heights in terms of the range. The lowest one's 14 feet. The highest one I have here is 22 feet. The effective age is between 1964 to 1990. And the rents are, you know, north of the $7.13 that I've offered here today. We've talked about cap rates, and that concludes my official my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, question?
Yes. So look at page 2. And that's the rent rule.
That's correct.
And what I want to focus on is the effective dates of these leases. So the first one, which is Magna Charge Battery, that's April of 2018, correct?
Yep.
Then there was Vacant Space. Then there's Versa Fittings, October of 2020.
Yep.
Then there's Tyco Integrated, September of 2019.
Yep.
Correct? Batesville, November of 2019. In Fasco, April of 2020. And then the province of Manitoba, April of 2018.
Yep.
So 3 of the leases on the property were done in 2020, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And as you've explained to us, Mr. Froelich, essentially what you've done is page 6 was the original model calculation. You've taken the model rents and you've adjusted them. In some cases, in maybe in all cases down, but you've adjusted them downwards. Is that correct?
Well, I haven't adjusted them up, Mr. Newman. That is correct. I'm sorry. It was too good. You gave me the opportunity, so I had to take it.
I used to like you, but I'm changing my opinion.
Oh, Mr. Newman, come on. We have this banter off the record as well.
So, but let's be clear about something. When we compare the actual rents negotiated, every single rent negotiated is less than the model, isn't it?
Yeah, but I guess they made a business decision to keep these tenants they have listed here to be more indicative of to ensure that they have a tenant located at their location. They don't want to deal with higher vacancy.
Is there something wrong with that?
Well, everyone makes a business decision. We have situations as well where property owners will only want a premium grade tenant and they'll only look for a higher rent.
Okay. But if I'm the buyer coming to buy this building on April 1 of 2021, the rent structure shown on page 2 of your report is what I'm going to buy, correct?
That is correct.
So, and then again, the standard 3% non-recoverable, correct?
Correct.
And the capitalization rate of 6.5%. So, any idea why this property gets a 6.5%?
Because it's a newer building, higher
Right?
ceiling heights, and a really good location.
And so buildings that are less good, bad English, that are not as well located, not that are older, of course, should get a higher capitalization rate.
Yes.
Okay.
And when we look at our cap rate study, just to further on this, you know, it's looking at this multi-tenanted building here. It's actually right in the middle between the 20th and 80th percentile. We're looking at multi-tenanted. It's in between the 5.55 and the 7.45.
Yes, and you'll be pleased to know, as I know you do, I'm not quarreling with the cap rate on this one.
Yeah, I'm just making an observation.
It's on a comparative basis with some of the other ones that I'm quarreling. All right. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McPherson, questions?
I have none, thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
So when you say actual year built 1972 to 1988, is that then reflecting that the original building was built in 1972 and then the addition was in 1988?
Yeah, that's why we have them both listed here. I think overall, looking at the building here, that there should be a higher effective age on this property, but we haven't done anything with regards to any changes to this recently. Okay, so again, why were you recommending a lower amount than you originally did? Well, when I looked at the model generated rates and I compared them to the actuals, I wanted to be mindful of that, right? But in the same regards, using a rent of $4.75 for this type of space is not reflective of market conditions. So in my recommendation, that was the lowest rent that we had on file, and I made a recommendation. A part of my blended rate was $6 for that property. So I felt $6 was a lot fairer to be reflective of the actual and reflective of the market. Because when we look at recommendations and market value, there's different ways we could come up with a value. And I thought I was being fair. Because if you look at the 713 that I provided here with my blended recommendation and my comparables, I feel that I provided a fair value here today. 713 is the number that you recommended per square foot, right? That's the rent that I'd use, correct. Okay, thanks. And
Mr. Frolick, in your presentation, any overrides on here?
Well, this was a number that I had placed down. I did overrides because, like, if I look at the original model rents that we had here that you could see on my briefs, you know, they were higher than $8, and my top end rent was $8, which matches the ticketed rent that they have on the books on the income and expense mailer. So the value that I've provided here today was in what I felt was fair, and in terms of getting a settlement here.
All right, I thank you. Mr. Newman, the floor is yours.
So 3 issues: the rent, the gross potential income, the non-recoverable. Capitalization rate is not an issue here. So on the rental rates, as Mr. Frolinger has, I did it again.
Mark, you're killing me. Have you been dealing with one of your peers? But isn't there a law firm, Frolinger? Have you been talking with him recently?
Yes. So the assessor has, as he noted, he's made an adjustment to the rent for the $4.75 a square foot space. He's brought that up to $6. And although he didn't indicate it, I believe he's also taken the province of Manitoba space and he's brought it down to $7 a square foot.
Yeah, but in hindsight, I think I made a mistake there. Because when I look at the actual mailer here, and if I use the $12.58 quoted on the total gross rent, and if well, that's a bit of a misnomer here because I know what I did here. I realize what I did here with regards to my $7 rent that I provided here. I've answered my own question. Thank you.
Okay, so but the answer is yes, an adjustment was made.
Yep.
So as my submission tells you, and it's on PDF page 3, I talk about the province of Manitoba lease. The base rate is $9.40, but with provincial leases, they're never truly net. There are a variety of things that are not recovered and not payable by the tenant. And so I used $7 a square foot, as did Mr. Frolinger for the province. I generally use the actual rents in place. I assigned $6.25 to the vacant 4,140 square feet. And that brought me to a gross potential income of $530,572 compared to the assessor's $572,000, which he indicated his recommendation was based on. And I point out, as I did through my cross-examination questions, 3 of these leases were done in 2020. One of these leases was done in 2019. These are relatively recent leases. And the other thing to be kept in mind is, as the assessor says, this is flex space in the sense that the province of Manitoba space, for example, is all office. But not all of it, not the entirety of the building is all office. Many of it or much of it has a little bit of office area within storage warehouse areas towards the back. So that's the difference between us in the rents. The non-recoverables, I'm not going to belabor it, but I am going to point out to you that there is a roof report on this one as well. And that starts at, I believe, probably page 7 of the PDF, again from just over a month ago, indicating the condition of the roof on what would be page number. So I said it started at 7, so on page number 8, you can see that they're recommending that roof C be replaced in 2023. And ultimately, continuing through the report onto PDF page 9 and PDF page 10, you can see at the end of the roof report a budget of $140,000 towards the cost of replacing that section of the roof. And so what that ultimately takes you to is the final page of my calculation. So the very last page of the PDF, you can see that I've used, generally speaking, the rents in place. The province has come down to $7 because of the structure of the lease. I've left the 7% vacancy. I've used a 7% non-recoverable for all the general reasons I articulated earlier as to why 3% is not enough. But again, here you've got a roof section that needs to be done. I left the 6.5 cap, and that turns into $6,727,000. Subject to questions, those are my submissions.
I thank you. Mr. Frolick, questions?
So for this type of spice, is $4.75 reflective of market conditions for this type of building?
Well, what I would say to you is it's big space. And in discussions with the property manager, generally speaking, it's got, in relative terms, much smaller office. So economies of scale will certainly bring the rate down somewhat. But you know, in the fall of 2020, and we really haven't talked about COVID here, but in the fall of 2020, we were in a COVID world. Things were uncertain. And this is what this landlord chose to do.
So can you explain to me why they would have a ticketed rent of $8 for this property, yet be accepting a lower rent than the $8 that they have on the books?
I don't even know what a ticketed rent means on this document.
Well, usually a ticketed rent means an indication of what they expect to get.
Well, okay.
No further questions.
Thank you. Bill, questions of,
No, I have no questions.
Mr. McPherson?
Just to clarify, Mr. Newman, this happens to have a report on the roof, as did one other when you were trying to make your case for the 7% expenses, but you're not relying totally on that. You're just giving that as an example of what should be included in non-recoverables. Is that correct?
Well, two things. Yes, what you just stated is correct, but what I'm trying to illustrate is why the allowance of the assessor, which in this case, and I'm just going to work off his original calculation. So his 3% would have been $18,000. Actually, I've got his effective gross income. So his 3% would be approximately $15,000. And, you know, this is 80,000 square feet of footprint of roof. This area, which appears to be, if we had to do the whole roof at $11 a square foot, it would take 53 years to cover the cost of the roof. But my point simply is that this area of the roof, which looks to be about 6% of the building area at $140,000, it's a big expense. It can't be captured by $15,000 a year or $15,960 a year. It's just not high enough. And, you know, say what you will about the land to building ratio, but when you look at the pictures, the overhead picture of this site that's found on page 5, you can see that actually, page 5 of the assessor's brief, you can see that actually there is a large parking area on this site. So there will be significant parking lot expenditures in time. But again, Mr. McPherson, the point was to illustrate two things. One, it's a site-specific issue for this property, but more generally, it just illustrates why the 3% is not enough.
Thank you. And I know you've answered this question, but I just wanted clarification. The Enfasco 18,363 at 475. I think your comment, and I'm paraphrasing here and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you said part of the reason was the economy of scale and part of the reason was the smaller amount of office finish. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So that's in general to the building. What about in comparison to the province of Manitoba?
The province of Manitoba is entirely office finish.
It's all office finish?
Yes.
Okay, I thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Newman, you have no problem in regard to the cap rate?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Either party wants summation?
Oh, no, thank you.
Well, all right. Let's go to 1440 Wellington Avenue. So Mr. Frolic, whenever you're ready.
Let me just get my brief.
I know.
You called me that too? Oh, my goodness. You know,
Something,
I could come up with pet names for you guys too, you know.
there is a Tom, right?
Just bear with me here for a sec here. Yeah, okay, thank you. This one will be short. File number is 22-2791. Roll number is 13000825100. The initial value was $2,844,000. And Mr. Newman and I have agreed to a value of $2,431,000. And
Mr. Newman,
Yes,
in agreement?
that's correct.
Any questions, Bill?
So aside from about $900 something, you basically agreed to what his original application was?
yeah, Mr. Yeah, when I looked at the numbers and I looked at the valuation, I thought that Mr. Newman's value was quite fair. And we had spent a significant amount of time talking about these, so I'm comfortable with the number he's presented for this property.
All right, that's the only question I have.
Mr. McPherson?
You said that you're comfortable with the number. Are you comfortable with the expenses that were
No, I'm not comfortable with the expenses, but the overall value I'm comfortable
overall
with.
value?
Yeah, so I based on what the value was in 2020, I was comfortable with the value.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll go to the last one, which is 1781 Wellington Avenue. Mr. Pollock?
Yep, I'm just getting my my documentation ready. Mr. Newman and I did have discussions on this property, but unfortunately we could not come to agreement. File number is 22-2069. Roll number is 07022306,000. The value that we have here is $2,213,000, and I'm asking it for it to be confirmed. Property was built in 1956. It has a wall height of 16 feet. What we have here is we have a land area of 85,934, and we have a leasable area of 22,637. The land to building ratio for this property is 3.77. But as opposed to the other properties that we've been dealing with here today, this is truly a warehouse space where we have the 22,000 square feet that are essentially with two PIDs, and you can see that. What we do have here is that the owner has been compliant with regards to completing the income expense information. What we do have here is of note is that there is a month-to-month lease that's taking place for this property, and there is an actual lease in place. The actual lease in place is significantly higher than the model rent that we've used at $9.35. Property owner has completed the income and expense mailer, and just totally showing here that just a breakdown of the overall value of the property. In October 16, 2019, property did sell for $2,450,000, which works out to $107.59 a square foot. What we do have here is we do have the listing that had taken place for this property. And I've already stated one of the leases that we have on file here at $9.35, utilizing 11,083. This property was for sale or for lease. Property highlights: property located on the northeast corner of Wellington and Barrie in St. James. Wellington Avenue is a major thoroughfare for the airport and connects to Route 90. Public transit stops are nearby, immediately adjacent to the site. Excess land for future development, and that's an interesting comment here. So even though it has a 3.77 land to building ratio, there is potential for future development. So clearly, when we talk about the 4-to-1 land to building ratio, and when the assessment department argues that it's a consideration, but it's not a be all end all, this clearly states that even though it has a 3.77 land to building ratio, there is excess land for future development. So that's an interesting comment. Turning the page, it shows that the initial listing was at $2,795,000, and we know that the sale price was $2,450,000. Some other dynamics with regards to the property. Because it was vacated at the time of the listing, the asking rent's $8.50, and it talks about the additional rent of $3.70%, and they include the management fee of 5% of the gross rent. So there is a recovery for the management fee. But we've all heard that argument before. When you see the bottom of page 4, you do see that there is potential. In a perfect world, there is potential for future development that could take place here. And what's interesting, and just bear with me here for 1 sec, because I do not want to speak out of turn. Yeah, it seems to be that, like, and it's confirmed in the picture here, that only 2 sides of the property have concrete on them, and the rest of it seems like gravel. So, which is why they talk about potential for future expansion. Some other highlights of the property that we've already discussed: the site coverage is 26%. Talks about the ceiling height of 14. Talks about different aspects of the grade doors that take place here. Talks about the electrical. Hydro and gas is separately metered for both units. Masonry steel frame and full sprinkler system. Looking at the pictures here, it shows that we have effective age of 1956, but the building here does not seem like a 1956 building based on the windows. So that must have been a consideration when the property owner paid the $2,450,000 when he looked at the quality of the property. What's also interesting to note is after the purchase of this property, it's not included in the brief, but I am under oath that the property owner did spend $350,000 on this property on improvements, where he made interior alterations, changed the new warehouse this office, new walls, doors, washroom fixtures, millwork, and exterior ramp. There was also some upgrades with regards to the mechanical and electrical, which would advocate for a higher effective age. On page 7, it shows the good location for this property that we're all aware of. And now we're looking at the financial breakdown for this property. So what we have here is we have two PIDs. We have a blended rate of $6.80, and we have a gross rent of $153,927. Both in the listing and in the actual rent that's in place for this property, we do have it's much higher than the $6.80 that we're using. We're using our 7% vacancy to come up with an effective gross income of $143,152. We got the 3% and the $385 for the shortfall, and we come up with $132,756. Utilizing a 6% cap rate, we came up with a value of $2,213,000. We did do a cap rate study for this property, and while we have it internally when we created the model for this property, the 6% that we had used for this property has been supported by the sale. Analysis was completed. Looking at comparables in the area, all within the St. James Industrial Park, King Edward, Century, Airport Road, Border, Wellington. All similar in terms of units. You know, the 2 units are 11,000 square feet. I've chosen comparables that are within 9,000 square feet to 15,000 square feet. Wall heights are similar heights. Effective years are within the categories. And we're showing a rent between $6.50 to $7.25. Based on the following information, I am very comfortable with a value of $2,213,000. Thank you very much, and I'm open to questions.
I thank you. Mr. Newman, questions of the assessor?
Page 2 of your brief.
Yes,
You got the rent roll, and you noted that there's a month-to-month in place. Did you look back at the history of the vacancy on this property?
I did. And there has been some vacancy with this property.
And in fact, you talked earlier about the sale in 2019. And you've noted that essentially there are 2 spaces in this building, which are very similar in size, just over 11,000 square feet. And so would you agree with me that one of the spaces, the space that is the month-to-month space, was the 11,554 square foot space was vacant at the time the building was purchased?
I do believe that's correct. Yes.
And so when you
And that is correct, because when they had placed the sale, when they put the sale of this property on the marketplace, they had clearly stated that the sale price was $2.8 million or just under that, and they were seeking a rent of $8.50 a square foot.
And did you go back and look at the records? Do you know that that space was vacant throughout 2018 as well?
You know what? I can't remember, Mr. Newman, because I've looked at so much information with regards to this hearing, and I am mindful there has been some sporadic vacancy, but there's also been full tenancies at different times within the past. You know, I think I for instance, since 2015, I could clarify that for you.
Well, I'll show the board it in my brief, because we have the rent rolls in my brief for 2018, for 2019, and 2020, each of which show the vacancy throughout those years.
Yeah,
But-
because 2015, and I am acknowledging a vacancy issue here, but in 2015, there was 0 vacancy. And let me just quickly check 2016. Unfortunately, in 2018 assessment year, there was an issue of non-compliance. So we don't have the mailer from 2016.
Okay, so, but in any event, as you confirmed in 2018, 2019, 2020, that half the building is vacant. Let's come back to the cap rate for a moment. So you've indicated you did a cap rate study. So the cap rate study you would have done would have been based on half the building being vacant, correct?
Correct. But what we would have established is we would have established a market rent or a model rent that we did. So when we did the cap rate study, we were under the assumption, I would have to double check, but we would probably have used a cap rate, a market rent that would have been similar to what the model rent of $6.50.
Right. Okay, so, and if you look at your brief, I want you to look at your page 4. Lower half of the page. So the shaded area in pink is a rectangle except for a square cut out of it at the corner, correct?
Correct.
And the part of the building that's vacant is essentially that part that's on the left-hand side. That's the west section of the building, correct?
I haven't inspected that, so I do not know.
Okay. So look at your page 6. So here they're showing what has an address of 801 Berry as being an available unit. That's the west face of the building, correct?
So just to confirm what you said, Mr. Newman, is that the west portion of the building does have the appliance store there and that the east side of the building is vacated.
No, it's the other way around.
Is it the other way around?
Yes, the east side has the appliance store.
Oh, yep, that's correct. I see that now. Yep. Okay. Sorry, I was just looking at the one side. You are correct.
So in the end, we agree that it's the west half of the building that's vacant, correct?
Correct.
All right. So then I want you to come back to your page 4, because the west half of the building, the entirety of the access to that building and the land area that is functional and usable for that portion of the building is that piece of land shaded in pink to the west of the actual building, between Berry and the face of the building, correct?
So do you want to repeat that question, please?
Yes. So actually, go to page 6.
Okay,
There's the photos of the west face of the building, correct?
that is correct. Yes.
Right. And so that land area in front of the gray painted west face of the building, that area of land is between Berry Street and the west face of the building.
That is correct. Thank you.
And so if you come back to page 4, the overhead photo, we can again see the west half of the building, which is the left side of the page. And now you see the land area that is available between the west face of the building and Berry Street, correct?
Correct.
All right. So from a land to building ratio perspective, this side of the building is very different than the rest of the building, isn't it?
Yeah, but in fairness, though, what I would say though is that maybe to make up for that, aspect. So when we're looking at this property, there's 2 things to consider. It's 11,000 square feet, so there's not going to be a need for a full 18-foot semi here. If you look at the garage unit that's here, it's conducive to not a semi trailer, but something like a 510 truck or whatnot. And in fairness to regards to maybe if the property owner requested a rent that was closer to what the model rent that we had used and not the $8.50, maybe this property would be fully tenanted right now with no vacancy issues.
Well, except we know that it had issues for 18 and for 19 and for 20, and now it's become a month to month effective April of 2021, correct?
So this comes to the fact that then maybe the business decision was made to seek a higher rent.
Sure. And then the capitalization rate, the model says 6%. Why does the model say a 1956 building gets a 6% capitalization rate?
Because when we look at this here right now, a couple things to consider is that we're looking at the sale price per unit. This knowledgeable buyer, knowledgeable seller.
Let's stop for a second.
The current owner paid.
Stop for a second. Did you do this calculation on page 8 of your brief is model generated, correct?
Correct.
You didn't do an override to select the 6%. The model selected 6%, correct?
That is correct.
So I come back to my question. Why does a 1956 building with 16-foot wall heights get a 6% capitalization rate?
Because at the value that you're seeking here right now, it works to a value of $75 a square foot. While meanwhile, the actual sale price for this property is over $100 a square foot. So
So,
that's a huge variance in terms of the overall market value. And
yeah,
it comes back to the fact that we're dealing with knowledgeable buyers and knowledgeable sellers. And the client that purchased this property, like you said, he was mindful of the vacancy issues here, but he still felt that that was a good value to purchase it at the $2,250,000.
and in hindsight, do you think that's turned out well for him?
Well, my question then is to you, why did he spend $350,000 on permits doing upgrades?
And
And the next question is why is he asking $850 a rent when, if he was really motivated to get a tenant? So those are just a couple questions that I have.
sure. But you understand the concept of an asking rate as opposed to an.
Oh, exactly. But the point is maybe this property's, maybe if it's closer to the model rate that we used for this property doesn't have a vacancy issue.
All right. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Boretsky.
So on there's the subject lease, which page? Was that on? Sorry. Page 2? Yeah, where it says. Okay. So stalwart machinery and supplies are current tenants on one side, on the one side of it, correct?
I'll say that again. Okay, I apologize.
3, you have subject property leases.
Yep,
And stalwart machinery and supplies started lease in December 1st, 2014.
that's correct.
They have a 10-month term. Or 10 years, sorry, 10 years.
That is correct. Yep.
Well, they are in there right now, correct?
Yes,
Only on one half of the building.
that's correct.
Okay. And now on the other side, there is a month-to-month lease.
That's
Correct.
correct.
Okay, so let's go back to the original, the subject lease. $9.35 a square foot is what they're paying.
That's correct.
What is the month-to-month paying?
What we have here is that it shows let me double check here. I think it's $450 or $650.
650.
$650, thank you.
Bruce.
$650.
Bruce.
Why do you think that one is, the subject lease is so much higher? Why is what is the reason for that?
I do not know. I am just basing it on what we see on the income and expense mailers that they've provided to us. Like, we're not using $9.35. Our model rent is $6.80.
$6.80.
Yeah, so I guess to answer my question here is then if you look at the leasing as well, is that they're seeking for the other parcel $8.50, despite the limitations that Mr. Newman has presented. Maybe if they're asking something closer to the model rent that we've provided, then the vacancy would not be an issue here. But I can't speculate on that. I'm just a potential observation.
Okay, on page 6.
Yep.
Oh, sorry. Where was the picture of the roof of the overhead shot?
Okay. I don't.
Okay, I got it.
Page 6, I don't have a picture of the overhead roof.
Yeah, it's on page 4. Excuse me.
Okay, no problem.
I'm just curious as that coloration on here. I don't know whether it means anything or not, but I'll just run it by you. On the building itself, on the 2 halves, it looks like one side is a lot smoother, nicer, however you want to describe it, than the west side.
That's a fair observation to make, because individuals that I see in front of me here right now, that is correct.
So that roof might have been redone there on the east side at one
Yep.
recently.
At some point,
So either one roof is old or one roof is new or somewhere in between, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we have no permits showing any roof work being done for this property.
So that's just one more thing here, the comparisons that you used, which was on page 9. You tried to match them up as best you could, as you mentioned. But I did note though that the wall heights all seem to be quite a bit higher than this property. This one has 14 feet. Or maybe I'm characterizing it incorrectly, but.
Well, we have 16 feet for wall height here.
Pardon me?
On the subject property, we have 16 feet here.
Oh, where did I see 14 then? Did I see 14 somewhere? You know what, I'm not gonna waste time looking for it, but I thought I had seen 14. But...
You did see it on the listing. On the listing, it said 14 feet.
Okay, well, I'll take you the 16 feet. Yeah, that sort of changes my my question then, so I'll just withdraw that one.
Okay.
So I think the comparisons are okay.
All right. Mr. McPherson, questions?
Yeah, a couple, thank you, Mr. Chair. First, the sale, 2019 sale, is this a bona fide arm's length transaction?
Based on our records, it is. Unfortunately, that was the research that we had done, but the property owner did not provide any sales mailer information.
There was no sales mailer.
No.
And the current tenants, there's no relationship between them and the owner of the property?
Not that I know of.
Okay, thank you. And just if we go back to your page 4 with that overhead shot with the pink and
Yep.
brown and gray shading, that in the front of the building of the both portions, it's shaded brown. Now, that's not part of the building, that's an actual land.
Yeah, the darker shade is actually not pavement. So that's why they were talking about the excess land potential here
Well,
when they had the sales listing.
but the excess land that they're talking about is that L shape over on.
Yeah, exactly. So my guess is if they want to do an inspection, and I'm purely speculating here, right? They would make it similar size to the other ones, another 10,000 square feet, and still have enough room for parking. And
Yeah.
that was a aspect that they put in the sales listing here. We don't.
Right.
You know,
But that's not my question. My question is, seems to be some kind of contention as to whether the west side of the building is inferior to the east side of the building because of the amount of access and egress. So I guess my question is there not access and egress across the front of the building? And if that's the case, is there a shared component for parking, et cetera, on the two sides? Do you know? I don't want a speculation. I just wonder if you know.
My guess is if there's a lack of parking on the west side, that they'd be able to utilize the parking space on the east side.
But you don't know for sure.
But I don't know for sure. no.
Okay, I will ask the same question of Mr. Newman and later. And just if you would indulge us, can you give us your logic for the 3% non-recoverables? I don't think you've really gone into that on any of the properties. Why it's 3%. Mr. Newman has told us his logic for the 7%. What is your logic for the 3%?
Because in our analysis that we've done, we haven't factored in the leasing commissions, we haven't factored in the tenant improvements. And in our analysis, we felt the 3% is a better reflection of what the actuals are, because the management fees at 5%, they are fully recoverable in a lot of leases. And then sometimes they're in excess, because there are situations here that take place where during my research, the management recoverables is 7%, if not higher than the 5% that we've used in the past. And then it all comes down to market value. So we could take a little bit here, a little bit there to come up with a valuable, which is favorable for the applicant and the owner. But at the end of the day, when we look at other sales comparables in the St. James area, and there is a sale for this property, we feel that it is fair. So in the macro perspective, without getting into details, we have made a change from the 2% to the 3% from last cycle. And overall, that's why there's such a discrepancy.
Thank you. Now, you say you've done an analysis. Do you know how many properties were involved in that analysis?
You know what,
Ballpark figure?
the modeling group does that. And
Mhm.
so I wasn't a part of those discussions. But, we have access to a lot of data. And based on the information that we find here, I'm confident of the 3% that we've used.
Okay, I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Merrick, just a couple questions. You have a copy, or you have a sale brochure for the subject property, but I don't see any date on here.
Well, what I can do is when we collect data, or when I collect data, or I come across mailings and listings, well, the sale took place before the reference date. So that should tell you something right there, correct?
Well, we have the sale reported, which is 2019.
Yes.
Okay, so I just.
And on record here, it hasn't changed hands again.
Okay.
So it's not a post reference.
That was the point. So when I look at the picture, there should be a date on it because they're asking, I think 279, 2,795,000. So is it up for sale again? Or, because I don't see any date on here.
Well, I am under oath.
Yeah.
And I will just give me 1 sec here.
So I don't know whether this is the old one or is it
Well,
new?
there isn't a new one because I'm under oath.
There isn't one?
There is not a new one.
There is not. Okay.
There is not a new one. No.
So-
And in fairness here, well, I saved this document on February 2nd, 2023 and 2021 at 4:37 p.m. I could show you this, but then I don't want to give access to information, but I am under oath.
That's
And
fine.
okay, and in fairness, you could ask, and in fairness, Mr. Merritt, you could ask Mr. Newman the same question.
All right. Just, you had talked about, you extracted a cap rate with this sale, correct?
That is correct.
So I'm just, we know how cap rates are developed, right?
Yep.
And that is NOI over sale price, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I'm just looking, the question came up. Normally, you look at the cap rate that is developed here, but Mr. Newman offered the saying that there was a vacancy problem in regards to this property. So the NOI is a little, I guess, too low.
Well, assuming when the purchaser purchases property, there's two things to consider here. And one of them is going to be, I'm going to talk about the previous cycle. So in the past, when in 2020, some agents said we could not do a cap rate study with a property that was vacant, that had any sort of vacancy issues or whatnot. However, in the 2023 assessment, they've included cap rate studies where there is a history of vacancy. So there's two trains of thought here. So what we've done is our cap rate study, we used, our model rents and our parameters to come up with a value. And so with that being said, because a purchaser is not going to purchase this property with perpetual vacancy. And I've clearly stated here that the vacancy may be an issue here because he's asking too much money. Because our model rents are $6.80 here right now. Is there a potential issue here? And so I don't know if this property is currently listed or not, or if it's currently full. But the point is, you're looking at when we do a cap rate study, looking at gross potential income. So to answer your question, that doing a cap rate study on something lower, the purchaser wouldn't have purchased this property, assuming it to run 50% vacate for the duration of it. And so in 2000, this property has currently it's not full, but we're looking at the reasoning behind it.
Okay, so I still want to go back to how the 6% was done for this property or what you're applying. Plus the fact that if you work through the numbers, etc., without me going through all your presentation, can you tell me what your NOI was for the subject property?
For the subject property, just give me 1 second.
No, without me, just tell me what it is. Or because I work out a number which should be $147,000.
And we had 149, 437.
149? Okay.
347, 437.
Okay.
See, the thing is with cap rate studies is that there's no way we could go through this detailed analysis here to do 8 properties or 7 properties in a 3-hour window.
Yeah.
So which is why we don't do it. The agents do it because it's beneficial.
Okay. I thank you. Mr. Newman, the floor is yours.
Okay. So, from my perspective, the model rent used isn't the issue. But let me just go back and clarify something. What's in this building? The east half of the building is the tenant Stalwart. What is Stalwart? Stalwart is an appliance store. If you're looking to buy appliances, you may go into Stalwart. A relatively small portion of the space is what I'll call a showroom for consumers to look at appliances of one kind or another. The majority of the space is the storage area, the warehouse area for the appliances. So that's what's in the space. Mr. Merritt, you asked questions, or somebody asked questions about whether you can get from one side of the property to the other. In my brief, PDF page 8 and 9 are photos. So PDF page 8, if you have that, is looking sort of in a mostly east, but a little bit southeasterly direction. That's the hotel on the right-hand side of the photo. But that's the west side of the building and looking primarily east. The next photo, page 9, is the west side of the building. And there's a big sign there. And if we were zoomed in closer on that sign, we would see Stalwart Appliances. Somebody asked about the front of the building and could you move across the front of the building? That's grass at the front of the building.
Well, it's sort of, to me, that looked like you know what? On further review, that is correct. It's bushes. I thought it was a sidewalk.
Yeah. So, but I'm not saying that there isn't a sidewalk along the front of the building. There is, because there are entranceways there, so people need to get to those entranceways. And one part of the sidewalk, if you looked at Mr. Frolinger's brief, at page 3.
Mr. Newman, are you doing this to piss me off?
No, I'm not true. I apologize.
Mr. Newman, I usually have the 3-strike rule. I think you've struck out twice already because I know you love baseball.
I fouled one off maybe.
I got a lot of.
So if you look at page 3 of the assessor's brief, you've got a photo of the east face of the building. And you can see that there is a sidewalk that comes around the corner. You can barely see the 801 numbers above the doorway there. And then it goes, that's the west face of the building. And then you've got the south face of the building, and you can see there's a sidewalk or a path along the front there. So my point simply is that there is grassed area in front of this building, the south face of this building. The east half of the building is stalwart appliances. Some work has been done there. That's why in part they're paying a higher rent. The east half of the building remains vacant, as we've discussed. So that's just a little bit about the background of the building. So the model rent is not the issue. I'm accepting the model rent. The issue is the vacancy. The issue is the non-recoverable expenses. And the issue is the capitalization rate. So let me just talk for a moment then about the non-recoverable expenses. And again, I would say the same thing to you again. What is found as part of, actually, you know what, let me take you through sequentially. So page 8 and 9 of the PDF were the photos. Then we get to page 11, which is the city detail showing the 16-foot wall height. The point about a 16-foot wall height is, of course, it leads to a lesser clear span. But then page 12 of the PDF, now we get to the rent rolls. So here's the rent roll, same rent roll that's in the assessor's brief, showing the month-to-month for the west half of the building at $6.50 gross. Page 13 is the rent roll at June of 20, which shows the west half of the building vacant and stalwart in the east half of the building at $9.35. Then we get to the rent roll at April of 2019, which shows that the space, the west half has been vacant since August of 2017. So yes, the space has been vacant for a considerable period of time. Yes, somebody bought the building. In hindsight, I don't think they bought it well, but they did what they did. Page 12 of the brief is a roof report dated July 7 of 22, directed to the property manager, talking about the older asphalt and gravel roof area, 75 by 158, with a quote to come within 10 days. And then if you go to what would be page 14 of the PDF, there's the quote to do the roof. 75 by 158 is 11,850 square feet. That is essentially the west half of the building. And there's a cost of $131,000 to do that. Essentially about $11 a square foot. And then, of course, there's a whole variety of photos that have been taken. And again, to the point you asked earlier, Mr. McPherson, that's there really to illustrate two things. One, why the 3% is not enough, but also more generally, why, in the case of this building, it's got a site-specific issue. So while I'm here, let me then just finish the balance of my brief. Go to the very last page. And the very last page is my workup. So again, I've used the assessor's rents. The vacancy has been increased slightly from 7% to 10%, which, considering a 3+ year vacancy of 50% of the building, is quite conservative. The non-recoverables have gone to 7%, but I've moved the capitalization rate up to 7% from 6%. That is generating a value of $1,716,000. Just a couple of additional comments. So, you know, and again, we see, if we go back to the text of my brief, so page 4 of the PDF, we see the broker capitalization rates, the B-class buildings at 6.5 to 7.25. The Colliers at 6 to 6.75 for the B-class buildings. Remembering there's a methodology issue with them. Cushman slightly lower. The observation I make to you is that the capitalization rate of 6% is model derived. Yes, I hear that I almost did it again. I hear that Mr. Froelich almost did it, that Mr. Froelich has looked at a cap rate study of this, but again, it's hard to do with a building that's got 50% vacancy because it's sure difficult to understand the motivation of that buyer. What I'm saying to you ultimately is, again, a 1956 building. Truly, the west half of the building is pure warehouse. The east half has a little bit of showroom, but primarily warehouse. So I moved the capitalization rate up to 7% because I just don't think this is a 6% building to begin with. And secondly, because I've been conservative on the vacancy, moving it only to 10%, I think some consideration should be given in the cap rate. And so, subject to questions, that would be my submission.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bollinger? Mark?
Wow.
It's
Mr. Newman, is there any current listings available for the space on the website right now at this time that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so do you know what they're asking for in terms of a market rent for that space?
I don't.
Okay. The property owner hasn't provided a sales mailer. Do you know how this property was purchased and financed?
I do not.
You know, it's almost 12 o'clock. No further questions.
Thank you. Mr. McPherson?
Just one question, Mr. Newman. Did you investigate the sale, the 2019 sale at all with the, I'm assuming the owners are your clients. I just wondered if you discussed that sale with them at all.
Yeah, well, so I directed all my communications through the property manager, but we've been managing the property for some time. And the view of the investor was that there was opportunity here. Whether COVID has contributed to that opportunity not being realized. But I guess the prior owner had difficulty recognizing some of the opportunity as well, because the vacancy goes back to 2017. But that was my understanding. They felt there was opportunity and it just hasn't come to be.
I thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome. Bill, questions?
I have no questions.
Okay, either party wants summation?
Nope. It's been a pleasure, guys.
Okay.
Signing off, Mr. Frolinger.
Have a good day, Mr. Assessor. We have heard all the scheduled items for the hearing, and this hearing is officially adjourned.